Hello. Oh, is that Tracy I'm hearing? How you doing? No, not yet.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to our Tuesday, February 28th, 2023 Board of Education meeting. If I could have everyone rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, which Dr. Trawick will lead us this evening in the Pledge of Allegiance. And if we could have a moment of silence for Neil Smalline, the father of Jeremy Smalline, and the father-in-law of Katrina Smalline. If you can keep the Smalline family in your thoughts and prayers, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can I have somebody move the agenda to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Farmer, second by Mr. Sawicki. Does anybody have any additions or corrections to the agenda? I have a couple. I want to swap item 4.02 and 4.03, so it'll be 4.02 will now be the budget update debt service, and then the tax cap update goes to 4.03. And I want to remove item 10.02, and we will make 10.03 10.02. With that, all those in favor of the agenda is amended? That passes 8-0. Moving on to staffing, can I have somebody move the staffing to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Maloney, second by Mr. Sawicki. Any comments, questions, concerns on staffing? Seeing none, all is in favor? That passes 8-0. Moving on to the GTA MOAs for additional FTEs. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Vice President Malor, seconded by Dr. Trawick. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all is in favor? That passes 8-0. Moving on to 4.01, mid-year strategic plan update. Superintendent Groutman.
Turn this on. Good evening. I am going to be presenting, do we all have to be at the same?
I'm not sure, it's up here though.
We all have to be there? Okay, I'm going to turn this off. All right, take two. So we have a mid-year strategic plan update for you tonight that we're going to be going through. To set some context for this, I want to point out that, as you know, we have a new strategic plan. So this, for the last 2 years or so, we've been working on updating so that as our old strategic plan phased out, we had a new one that we were able to launch at the beginning of this year. So you all know about the REACH 2027 plan that we've created. A couple of things that are important to note. We have always provided 2 presentations a year around the strategic plan, just to give a sense of where we are in our progress and the work that goes into meeting the goals and key areas in the strategic plan. On top of that, though, it's important to recognize that there's a lot of work going on throughout the year. So while we pause twice a year to really look at this and look at some of the metrics and key progress areas that are noted in here, the thing that's important to note is throughout the year, that's also the way I designed my memo for you as board members, so that everything that I'm sharing in terms of updates and work that's going on is really shared and communicated with you by those key priority or commitment areas. And in addition to that, we do presentations throughout the year. we do retreats, and all of those times that we get in front of you or our community, we're really trying to make sure that we anchor everything into what we've outlined in this plan. So for the first time through, I will say, this is the most difficult time to do an update because it's the first year of a new plan. So the way that we're presenting to this for you tonight hopefully is helpful. If there's feedback, certainly we're always open to additional feedback around what makes the most sense and what is helpful for you. As you can see, we've got a picture of the REACH 2027 plan we are incredibly proud of. In there, you see our vision is clearly noted. The Greece Central School District will be a source of pride and inspiration for the Greece community, where we serve as a hub for equality, creativity, innovation, and inclusion. We'll transform our educational approach in order to elevate the cultural assets, voice, and agency of all members, as well as empower students to flourish as responsible, empathetic, engaged citizens. So I just read that because that was the words not of me. Those are words from many, many stakeholders that came together to really work on this plan. We also worked hard to define ourselves and as a district. So we have 3 commitment areas that we'll be talking about and reporting on tonight. Commitment 1 is around igniting learning. So when you think about traditional academic measures and things that we think about in terms of school, much of that falls under that commitment 1. In terms of commitment 2, everything that falls under that area really for us is around trying to cultivate trust, not only with our students and families, but with staff members and our community at large. And then commitment 3 is around expanding opportunities. And down at the bottom, you see those words are really the values that really define us that coincide with REACH. And again, those are not words that we picked to be showy or just to match the letters. Those were words that came from students, from parents, from people that were engaged in this process with us. So the way we've designed the presentation is really around the commitment area. So you can see for commitment 1, we say we're committed to fostering learning environments that promote student engagement, belonging, and academic growth. And what we've included here on this page is just what is exactly pulled from the strategic plan. These are the aligned progress measures that we said we are going to report on and that we're going to be following throughout this 5 years. So the ones that we have here are important to note. So professional learning participation of our staff, inclusion of our students with disabilities, ELA and math achievement, ELA and math growth, and credit accrual. So what I'm hoping to have happen tonight is that you'll get a better understanding of what we mean by those measures. What do they actually look like and mean, and like how are you measuring and following that? But I would also sort of caution everyone here, because when we're talking about a big area like igniting learning, there is far more that we're following and measuring that's not included in this. So I say that because we are data rich. There's a lot of things going on in schools. There's a lot of more specific, narrow work that happens to really look at student achievement and learning that may not be included in here. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows it's not all inclusive, but we did pick some broader measures so that we have a big idea with a strategic plan how we're doing. So each time I'll introduce this page for each key commitment area, and then we'll have different folks come up to the podium to share around some of our progress. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeremy.
Okay, good evening. So this slide here demonstrates the monthly professional learning hours since the plan's been put in place in July. So the progress measuring point that we're looking at is staff participating in more than 10 hours of professional learning. And the chart here, what you're looking at, demonstrates just the professional learning for GTA. And the reason why you're looking at just GTA currently is that our system that we use to monitor professional learning is done through Frontline. And when it was originally set up and established, it was set up just to measure continuing teacher and learning education that's mandated by the state. So our system is just set up right now to measure GTA. However, as we start working through the strategic plan, we're going to look for other ways that we could start bringing in professional learning for our Teamsters, ACCEPT, and the other groups that are participating. They are participating in professional learning right now. It's just that the tool to measure that is not set up currently for anybody but GTA. So what this slide shows right now is the number of professional learning hours that has taken place through the different months up until January. And you can see that to start, July was a key time for us to offer professional learning, and many GTA members took advantage of that time and participated. Over 900 hours were completed during the month of July. As you go through the months, you can see different months vary. Obviously, September is a difficult month for a lot of people that are just starting off the school year. And again, I think when you look at January, it's another difficult time for people as they go through the holidays and coming back to school. So we'll continue to measure this and report out again at the end of the year of what it looks like across the 10 months of the school year. This next slide shows what has actually been completed. So the metric asks for 10 hours, and as many of you know, that is the requirement for GTA to do a minimum of 10 hours up to 20 hours. And what you're looking at here shows you the amount of hours that have been fully completed or that are in progress. And there's a big, so when it's completed really means that you not only, if you've taken the professional learning, but you actually went into Frontline and clicked off that it was completed. So for some of these that might say it's in progress, it may mean that they've actually done the professional learning. They just have to go back into the system and click off on that. And in some cases, like when you look at 1 or 2 hours you have 1 or 2 hours that are in progress, that's in blue. That may mean that they've taken 1 or 2 hours of that class, and there's 2 or 3 or more hours in the near future that is part of that professional development. Some of those are multi-day, and they're spread out through the months. So they've taken 1 or 2 of those classes or courses already, and they're still need to take them as the year progresses. So you can see we have about 325 that are already over that have completed that minimum of 10 hours, and about 135 that are in progress above that mark. We have 101 that still need to start the process. This is something new in the contract for GTA, so we're assuming that for many of them, they're still trying to understand what the new contract says and what the expectations are. But we are working with GTA, and they are communicating that out, and we expect to see that change in the near future when we report out.
Good evening, everyone. This slide represents the metric of the spirit of inclusion and all the benefits that go along with including our students with disabilities alongside their general education peers. Just to note that this is K-5 data that we'll be pulling and presenting to the board on a regular basis. And also that it's somewhat of a moving target because this is pulled based on the students' IEPs, and IEPs are changing regularly. But I think more important than any percentage or metric, specificity is really the spirit of this, that we're looking to increase the amount of time that students with disabilities are included with their general education peers, because we know the benefits that come along with that.
Good evening, everybody. So this graph represents math achievement, and it's K-8, and we use iReady data to measure the math achievement for all of our students meeting expectations. And the thing that we like about this is it allows us to do a measure 3 times a year. So what you're seeing there is in 1920 to the far left, we didn't do the spring measure in 1920 because of COVID, but this does allow you to see the progress that our students make from when we do the fall dipstick to winter to spring. And then that shows on the far right the 22-23 data, showing both the fall and the winter, and then we will be doing updating you with the spring data later this year. Math achievement. This next slide shows you our K-8 reading achievement, again, using iReady as our measure. In a lot of strategic plans, you'll see state assessment data, and we do look at our state assessment data primarily to inform our curriculum, see where we may have some gaps in our standards. But the thing that we really love about this is it's K-8. A lot of our students don't sit for the state assessments, right? Especially our younger students. So this allows us to really get a dipstick in how our students are doing specific to reading achievement. And again, we do this 3 times a year. Mm-hmm. Yes, there was a error in one of the slides. I think it said math twice. So this, what you're seeing this evening, is accurate. Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Sean. Yep. This next slide is another thing that we measure. So this slide is specific to student growth and the growth that students are making. And we're particularly proud of this slide because if you look at the year 2021, we were at 77%. And in 21-22, we were able to climb to 108. So what that basically means is we're looking for a 4% increase in the growth that our students are making. So this data is based on baseline data that we get from our students at the beginning of the year, and it really does measure growth. So this is something that, you know, we're particularly proud of, that we jumped from 77 to 2021 in 2021 to 108, 21-22. And, you know, we're hopeful that we'll get 4% moving forward, but that's one that might fluctuate based on the students. But this is something that's specific not only at achievement, but looking at growth as well. And then this slide shows our math growth. So again, in 2021 at 71%, and then in 21-22 jumping to 97%. So again, far exceeding the 4% increase that we had hoped. And we're super excited about this because this really shows how hard the efforts that we've been doing to really close the gap, especially coming off of the pandemic, what that has looked like for our students individually with making growth.
The strongest indicator of on-time graduation is the amount of credits a ninth grader receives. So a ninth grader is expected to achieve 6 or more credits. So one of our metrics is to look for an increase in ninth graders receiving 6 or more credits at the end of their ninth grade year, and our goal is to increase that by 4%. As you can see, we're really going to start seeing the COVID dip in these students. In 2021, we had a significant dip in our ninth graders achieving 6 credits because, again, we had a different learning modality. Some of the kids struggled with that. But then we had an increase last year as well. And again, we watch this closely throughout. Our students begin gaining ninth grade credit in 8th grade. So we work feverishly starting in 8th grade to work towards this achievement. And we typically score, so as we look at this 2021 cohort, we usually score between 5 and 10% higher than what we see at 9th grade. So if we get the 10%, we should be at about 85% by the time these students graduate in 2024. And then hopefully, 2025 actually. Hopefully we'll make that increase, and we're working very hard at monitoring the students beginning in 8th grade for this.
So here you see our second commitment area, which is around cultivating trust, like I mentioned. The area or the measures that we're looking at here are indicated on this page. So things like staff retention, and the way we're going to be measuring that is the staff that are reaching longevity milestones. Things like shared decision making. So when you're thinking about trust, we are making a lot of decisions as a school and school district. And so the idea of making sure that we have staff members, parent members, and students part of those shared decision-making structures and committees. Equitable hiring practices, really looking at increasing the number of staff representation to match our community. And then down below, you'll see these three below, student perception survey, instructional staff survey, and then family perception survey. This is perception survey data that we have been gathering really for years. So we care about numbers, but we also care about what people think and feel. So we're trying to bring that in here by also recognizing and using the surveys, which are also rooted in best practice in terms of what we find in terms of making a difference with achievement. So with that, those are the ones that we're going to walk through, and I'll have Jeremy come back up.
Okay, so as Kathy mentioned, we're measuring staff retention through different milestones throughout their career here in Greece. And so what this chart shows you is the breakdown, and we did it by units, so you can see to the right the different units within the district and that are color-coded, and then you see the 0 through 5. So right now, 37% of our our total workforce has been in the district 0 to 5 years. We chose the 5-year piece there because with all the units, there's different milestones. So for teachers, there's tenure, some are 3 years, some are 4 years. With some of our civil service, there's going into permanent rather than provisional status within civil service. And in some cases, at the 5-year mark, they actually reach having Section 75 rates, which is very similar to having tenure. So we chose the 0 to 5 as a good marker, as one of those longevity kind of milestones to look at. Next, we measured 6 through 10 years. So you can see it's about 14% of our workforce is within that 6 to 10 years. We looked at that time frame because that's, in some cases, that vetting period for retirement within that 10 years. So that's the milestone we chose there. And then moving forward, we moved in that 5-year span, so 11 to 15 years. You can see it about 11%. And then you could also see where some of the larger chunks of our staff are grouped. So the green represents GTA. So there's a large number in that 11 to 15, the 16 to 20, and the 21 to 30 years that are primarily our GTA members. And then you can see that 5% of our staff that is 30-plus years within the district.
One of the areas that we've really prioritized as an area to focus on in the strategic plan is shared decision-making at both the district level and the school level. This year, we've had a district improvement team that's really been hyper-focused on developing best practices for shared decision-making at both levels. And one specific area that we're looking to improve on in the strategic plan is the representation of the different stakeholder groups on those shared decision-making teams at both levels. So this chart will show you the baseline for our district committees, as well as our building level school improvement teams, which is the shared decision-making body at each school, and the representation of staff, parents, and students on those committees. Again, this is a baseline in an area that we're going to be looking to improve over the course of the REACH strategic plan. This one is also me. Sorry I stepped away. All right. So one of the biggest areas that we use to inform our action steps when it comes to really what we're doing with improvement at the district and school level is to look to our perception surveys as our really largest area of kind of consolidated feedback that we get from the different stakeholder groups. So these are given and organized via a Panorama platform, online platform, and they're bucketed into each commitment of the strategic plan. And for Cultivate Trust, they're kind of questions are lumped together and given a positivity rating based on the responses of each stakeholder group. So we have 3 stakeholder groups that we focus on, as the superintendent mentioned. We have students, instructional staff, and families that are here in the strategic plan. And what you're looking at here is the student positivity rating for the Cultivate Trust bucket of questions, which include questions such as, my teachers care about me, and I feel like I belong at school. So we have a Likert scale, and the more positive the rating, that would be reflected on this chart. Staff positivity ratings for Cultivate Trust include questions like the relationships between students and teachers are respectful, the working environment in my school is positive, and you see the data there reflected as a positivity rating for staff. And then finally, for families, some of the questions in this positivity rating category are staff at this school care about what families think, and teachers at my child's school have respect for my child.
So one point I would make just about that perception data is a lot of the things that we have here in this bigger strategic plan update seem sort of like isolated pieces. What we do as a team and with our administrative team and school teams is we're using all of this data in an ongoing way. So you're getting updates in memo and with presentations and here. What's happening really at the school level and at the district level is we're constantly immersed in data. So principals are looking at that iReady data on a monthly basis. Todd and Suzanne do an amazing job of sending that out so that school teams can be looking at that to see where are kids with their reading achievement or their growth or math achievement and growth. But then what we've worked hard to do as an administrative team is also build in opportunities for something that we call data dives. And those are days where school teams come together and really look at triangulating a lot of things. Because if we are only looking, for example, at reading achievement and we haven't looked at attendance data, we can be missing the mark and making decisions or adding things or changing things when it's really not a reading achievement issue. It might be the fact that the student isn't in school. So I share that example only because I want people to realize that there's a lot of different forms of data. They all play into decision making, and that perception data, which a lot of districts don't always use, is important because how a student feels or a parent feels makes a big difference and oftentimes can help us move in a better direction to support kids and families. So this last area is commitment 3, which is around expanding learning. And you can see this area is looking at things like clubs and services. So the idea that students need to feel a belonging to school, and oftentimes that is through a sport, an activity, a club. So we really want to measure that to find out, are kids finding ways to connect into school outside of just traditional academics? We're looking at the community school strategy, just looking at this idea that we have lead innovators that we've partnered with. Are we increasing that number? Post-secondary enrollment, really looking at what are our students doing post-secondary in terms of workforce, college, all of those things. We have Cell Panorama survey data, which is again just looking at social emotional learning competencies, things like self-management and self-regulation, and really just all those things that we sort of think about as traditional work habits almost in school. The CCCR index, which is looking at college career civic readiness, is another indicator that the state provides us, which we'll share out. And then technology innovation, which is just this idea of increasing leadership and collaboration, really to get to higher levels of engagement. So those are what the team decided on in terms of these progress measures, and I'll turn it right over. Mike again.
Okay. One of the things in the last strategic plan that was really difficult for us to nail down was exactly how to track the student participation in extracurriculars before and after school. So this summer, we put a lot of time and effort into kind of thinking how we're going to do that, and we just landed on a really good old-fashioned survey to the building principals to gauge the number of students that are participating in the number of clubs at each school. So what you see here is a baseline for us to start from in the plan. The top chart represents the average number of the number of unique clubs that are currently in practice at elementary and secondary. So for example, if 5 different elementary schools have a Lego club, that's going to be counted as one unique club. So that's the first chart. And then the second chart is the average number of students participating in any extracurricular activity at both the elementary level and the secondary level. So that's our baseline, and the numbers we'll be looking to grow upon as we go.
This next slide represents the work that we've done around community schools. If you might remember, in our last strategic plan, we counted the number of partnerships that we had around community schools, and I'm pleased to report that we quickly, exceeded the number of partnerships. We got a little more creative, though, in looking at the different levels of support. So we have connectors, we have sustainers, and then we have what Kathy had mentioned around lead innovators, around the different sort of partnerships that we have with different outside agencies and supports for community schools. And the lead innovator sort of level really offers very, very, systemic support for one or more of our schools. So what you see up here is some of the various lead innovators that are highlighted: Nazareth College, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Together Now, Rochester Regional Health, Children's Institute, the Community Place, Center for Youth, Food Link, and Hillside. So we're looking to grow those. That doesn't mean that having a parent come in or having a community member come in once and do something in our schools, we don't turn away that level of support, right? That's fantastic level of support. And that's sort of at that connector level, and we still are looking for those opportunities, but these are really that highest level of support across the system. And then what is outlined there as well is what the community schools through these agencies have been able to provide for our students and for our community, from the after-school clubs, the free summer programming, the community-based mental health services, the parent-centered, our early learning center. It goes on and on and on, the great things that we're doing. And we're going to be reporting out to you in more specificity later this year around some of the advances that we've done, that we've made with community schools. But this, in the strategic plan, it's really specifically looking at that lead innovator support and how we're growing and expanding upon that.
This is a slide that we should be extremely proud of. This is the annual College and Career and Civic Readiness Index, and what this basically measures is what are the experiences that we provide our students that helps to prepare them for life and either in the world of work or at college and beyond. And this metric is really unique because I think of it kind of like when you go to the Office of Motor Vehicles and you get certain amount of points for this form of identification and maybe less for that. So it awards points for students for taking college courses. It awards points for students who maybe don't take a college course but get the seal of civic readiness. It allows for special education students to receive additional points when they receive different types of diplomas. So this is an ESSA metric, and it makes me nuts sometimes because it's never reported in the media. And the ESSA metrics score between a 1 and 4. Greece Central School District has consistently, since this metric has been released, received a 4 in this. So to me, this is evidence of our equity work and what we believe in and the opportunities that we provide for all students. The district digital innovation team is probably my favorite team within Greece Central School District. It is teachers from all of our buildings across the district. It doesn't matter what your content area specialty is. If you're interested in technology, this is the group for you. And this is a highly energetic, enthusiastic group of educators who are willing to try new things, be guinea pigs per se in classrooms, and then go back and help and assist their colleagues in implementing the same technology. So this is a great group to watch. You can see how crowded the room is and the energy within the room from our last meeting. But a really exciting team that helps to promote our technology innovation across the district. We also have some other opportunities going on that are incredibly exciting, and again, softly contribute to our College and Career Civic Readiness Index. We have a student-led Chromebook repair program. So in other words, we are teaching our students to repair our own Chromebooks. There are several certifications that go along with that, and it helps keep things moving along. We don't have to pay people to do this. Students earn credit for it, and they also sometimes receive the certification. If you haven't seen Titan Times and Titan News and the announcements that are going on, there's several TV stations across the district. I'm really excited. Arcadia was the first to start this every morning, and they have their own YouTube channel. But now the middle school has decided to do it as well. So you see the bridge that's naturally occurring with our students as they move now from middle school to high school. And our esports program has been fantastic. It's one of the clubs that Mike mentioned that's new to us. It's attracted a whole different type of student. Many of these students were not engaged in any of club activities ever. And our Olympia team was placed nationally this year, so they also excel at it. And it's not just gaming. People think that that's just what they do. There's a whole management component to it as well, where students are expected to take different roles with the team in terms of marketing, leadership, getting them what they need to compete. It's a really unique thing that's coming around. It is a college-recognized sport, and they are actually giving scholarships for it at this point. So it's up and coming, and you're going to see more of it in the future. But it's exciting.
Okay. And to update on the Panorama SEL screener. So in addition to the perception surveys that I mentioned earlier, in addition to the perception surveys that I mentioned earlier, which are really getting stakeholder perceptions about the school environment, the SEL screeners are really unique to the individual students, and they give us the student perceptions of their capacities in these 5 different competency areas. So we're looking really at this as a student reflection of their abilities as they perceive them. So we have the SEL screener at 3.5 and the SEL screener at 6.12, which you can see here, our baseline for each of the 5 competencies. So questions regarding the social awareness competency are such as, how often do you notice that others need help and then offer to help them? Self-management, once you get upset, how often can you get yourself to calm down? Responsible decision-making, how often do you follow directions and expectations? Relationship skills, how often do you work well with other students even when they are different from you? And self-awareness, how often are you able to identify your emotions in the moment? Now, just like the perception survey, those questions are just examples of questions within the buckets of those 5 different competencies. But again, we use those and those responses to kind of drive areas for actions within school improvement plans and for other work at both the building and the district level.
So that basically concludes our first update. So like I said at the beginning, it was difficult doing this the first time through. You'll see in some cases, we were able to go back and use data from previous years, and then in other cases, we're starting with, this is the baseline. And that is something that we've always been challenged with strategic plans. But we look forward to continuing to provide you updates. We feel like we've set it up in a way where we are going to be able to look long-term at this and see progress and growth, and we also feel like it's balanced in terms of really looking at more concrete achievement numbers, but also looking at perception and how students feel and those things so that we can use it together. So with that, do you have questions for us?
Okay, I have 3 questions. I won't ask them in succession. I'll wait. But first, I just want to say I appreciate so much you all putting this report together. I know as of recently, as a board at least, we have asked for more and more data. So I do appreciate you all providing so much data on a variety of different topics. I also appreciate you explaining that even though we're seeing a snapshot here, that building principals and buildings actually do a deep dive and they bring the data together. So they're not just looking at it in isolation. So I appreciate that. That was not lost here. So thank you. My first question is regarding the community schools. I'm always excited to see how many partnerships we have and how we're continuing to expand opportunities for more. Could you just take a moment just to explain a little bit about why is it that we are continuing to push out in the community? What is it that, and I'm saying this kind of tongue-in-cheek because I kind of know the answer, but I feel like anytime we can put the narrative out there, we should. So what is it that we're seeing in our kids and our families that are saying to us that a school that traditionally is, you know, we educate kids, right? We don't take care of families. But what is it that has caused us to make this shift?
So I'm going to say some things, and then I'm guessing that Dr. Payne may want to offer some more. So from my perspective, the community schools metric is one of our most crucial metrics that we have and that we are following. The one thing that I know everyone here can agree with is that we have students with pretty significant needs. We've talked a lot about how we've got students and families in our communities that are hurting and that are often lacking resources or not knowing where to go. And our point all along has been that we are blessed and lucky to have students every day in our schools for 7 hours. And so with that, we also want to make sure that we take advantage as much as possible in terms of providing what we can. So the idea behind community schools is that they become the hub, our schools, and we provide the supports and services that kids need. And that oftentimes we can do that right in school. So that partnership with Genesee Mental Health is a good example of we can bring that right to school and make sure kids get what they need right there. The other point that I think is really important conceptually is it's changing our mindset around ownership. So, and I think this is important because continuously we hear schools on the hook for everything. So anything that's wrong right now is really looked at that schools must fix. So if it's mental health, it's the school's responsibility. If it's achievement, it's the school's responsibility. If it's violence, it's the school's responsibility. If it's something social media or bullying, even though they've got their phones and they're doing everything at home, it's still the school's responsibility. And I think my bigger point here that I think is important to note is that this strategy is saying it isn't just one of us. This is about bringing a community together. It's about our students. It's about really reaching out to community-like partnerships. It's about looking at supports and services in our community. It's about anchoring in and supporting and connecting with parents. And how do we sort of all together really work as a community to improve outcomes for our students and families? I say that recognizing the difficulty of that, but also that over time, we've seen more and more success with really being able to wrap supports and see progress with a lot of families. And there's still a ton of work left to do, but coming off of the pandemic, I know I can say I've never seen a community in my 30 years of education more needy and more hurting than I have right now. So I think it's even more of the case for how do we really come together and share that ownership and make sure that we strengthen our community.
The only thing that I would just sort of elaborate on, I guess, a little bit as well, is when you think about several years ago when we started the community school strategy, really we began in one school, Long Ridge, and it really began with clubs. And we had a great connection with Hope Church and bringing basketball. And so when I look at that slide and I look at all of the different partnerships that we've been able to establish and have really, really strategic targeted support in our schools, it's just, you know, like we beam with pride and being able to have that in our community. So I think that that's certainly a piece of it. The other piece too is just this understanding that we just don't willy-nilly like talk to somebody about a support. We do a needs assessment. We identify what the needs are, like, and this happens at all of our schools, all of our community schools, and then from there, we go out and we seek the different partnerships that might have availability around that. So we have specific goals that we've called out, but so do the partnerships that we're partnering with. They have goals. So we kind of come together to the table to say, how are we going to work together to be able to satisfy and move this? And then the last piece that I just want to say is we know that the research around community schools says that if you implement this strategy, academic achievement will improve. Student sense of belonging, family engagement improves. Absenteeism improves. Behavior improves. Like all those things that we've called out improves once you have once you have community school strategy in place for an extended period of time. So I hope that answers that question, and we look forward to, again, later this year, being able to provide you with more details on community schools. Thank you.
Mr. Sawicki?
So a question to Dr. Trawick's point around the data deep dives, right? Just using these metrics, are they the same metrics used at each school level too? Like, do they care about it the same way? We're seeing the rolled up version here, right? And then I guess a related question, is our baseline the target for them, like to at least get to our average to start? And or are there other benchmarks out there that we're chasing? I know it's a loaded question and there's a million variables, but how are we thinking about that?
Yep, so I'll say each school really informs their plan based on the commitments that we have in our strategic plan. And largely the data that we use at the school level is the same data that we use at the district level. However, the targets are not the same across the board. Really, that's unique to each different school. And the way that we use the data dives is to give building teams an extended period of time to look at their own data and really kind of articulate areas for action based on what they see that's unique to their school. So we just got done going and visiting every school and talking about their different data with them. And the conversations were great, and no two were really exactly the same because every school has a unique priority area of focus that comes from their own data dive with their team. So it's kind of a hybrid of both, to answer your question, a little bit with the consistent metrics and the consistent data between districts and schools, but then some autonomy at the school to really build their own areas of improvement based on what they've seen.
Just to follow up on that point, and I guess what I'm getting at there too, right, and just let me repeat it back. What I'm hearing is you're customizing targets for each of the schools, right, depending on the shape of their environment. But as we think about our strategic plan, right, everyone's got a target in mind that they have to, some schools might have to get 6 points better, some might have to get 10 points better, but each one's got to contribute, right, so that the greater whole is achieved. And we're thinking about that at the school level and setting those targets with that type of mindset.
Yes, absolutely. And one other layer that I didn't mention is that at the district level, we've kind of mirrored the annual, so this is a 5-year plan.
Yep.
But we've mirrored the kind of annual improvement planning process at the district level too. And we have our district improvement plan, which really is specific to this, that has annual metrics that are benchmarks for us to try to get to, in the overall scope of the 5-year plan here too.
Okay.
So we're doing that district level too.
Great, thank you.
Vice President Millar?
I'm thrilled that you're asking parents and for their perception. What kind of numbers do you get back for parents responding?
To be transparent, we have some work to do there.
Okay.
And we've tried to get really creative with how and when we distribute the surveys, like at pickup and at dismissal and at open houses and different events that kind of align with the window that it's open. It is our lowest response rate of the 3 subgroups, but with our stakeholder groups, I should say, but with the other 2, we have a captive audience, so we have time for them to do it, whether it's within the contract or the instructional day. So we do have work to do there. As far as like a specific number, it does vary by school, so I don't have a specific number to give you, other than to say that it's something we're looking to improve, and when compared with the other 2, it's the lowest.
Excellent. I'm also happy to see clubs back. There was that gap of time, and it's wonderful that children are getting that opportunity. They have fun in school when they have clubs, so thank you.
Do you have a question? Ms. Farah?
Thank you. My question is I know that we have a 5-year program, plan in place. My thought is, our high schoolers, they don't have 5 years left. So do we have a more immediate plan for them, the ones that are seniors right now, that they're not going to be here? So I know that we're targeting 4% each year. I would think that we may want to target a little higher for the high schoolers since they're not going to be able to complete this plan while they're here. Is there something in place for them?
Well, our goal for graduation is always 100%, and you'll see as the year goes on that there's more and more opportunities for students. That's our credit recovery programs. That's our belief that multiple opportunities for success is important. That's why we push kids to retake exams. You're going to see some Saturday schools going on, some vacation schools going on for high schoolers. They've been going on for quite some time. Traditionally, Greece was one of the first school districts to offer such a thing, and you see it replicated in other districts. I can assure you that principals are watching their graduation credits every single marking period. And they're reviewing that list. We're closely watching kids who move in and out of the district. So it's constant. Just because it's not within this plan doesn't mean it's not happening.
I would also add one thing, and I think that's a good question, and I should have mentioned it at the beginning, but this is our bigger strategic plan, so that's sort of like way up here. Then Mike mentioned the DSIP, which is our district improvement plan, which kind of sits almost like below. And then every school has a school improvement plan as well, which is based on, they're looking at annual measures. So while they're all aligned, the schools, like in Arcadia High School or Olympia High School, or Olympia, I should say, would be looking at an annual goal and identifying specific key things that they're working on that aren't necessarily reflected like like reported on like here.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonnegorio.
Thank you. First off, I want to say I'm just really impressed by the commitment of our teachers to just keep themselves improving their own development. July numbers, schools just ended. I assume there's some discretion as to whether they participate there, but it's just amazing to see the level of commitment. So, my applause to them for that. I have a question regarding how we do the measurement. You have for example, ELA math achievement, the growth, and I'm a little confused as to why we have a 4% growth goal, but we seem to be blowing that away. So that's fantastic. Good news. And then we have the credit accrual. Can you give me some insight into what is the difference in measurement? What are we capturing in, say, the achievement measures versus the credit accruals? And maybe just address the goal question as well. Sorry for adding a bunch in there.
So Mark, the 4% is that's actually a number that has been recommended by the state. So with a lot of our school improvement work that we've done, it's been this recommendation around 4%. So that's what we've used. The thing that I have to say that I like about that is it does feel so much more realistic, and there's times when our schools are looking at their own data and things that our students are doing, and we are, in many cases, blowing that out of the water. And if they need to reset a goal, like the schools need to reset a goal, then they will do that. I can tell you there was a time when we had school improvement plans, and they were written that 100% of our students will meet or exceed the standards. And I can tell you that, our teachers felt defeated right out of the box. So I feel like that 4% is a really realistic measure.
And again, our goal is always 100% of our students will achieve 6 credits by the end of 9th grade. And to Val's point, this 4%, if you were to do that over time, we would be over 100% of our students meeting that goal. And when we started it prior to COVID, we were in the 90s. So an important thing to remember from a statistical standpoint, it's easier to move a student from 70 to 80%. It gets really hard once you hit 90%, and I don't care where you are, to move kids to 100%, right? Because again, there's different factors that come into that play into that make it especially challenging. And I'll be able to do in a future presentation, share a little bit more of how we do compared to other districts. But again, our goal is always 100%, but to Val's point, our teachers are working incredibly hard, and we do get results. Our results for students are higher than those with similar poverty rates. So that says something huge, and we're working really hard to make that happen.
Thank you. So the other question that I had, well, first, part of it was already answered, and that was around with the community schools model. My question was going to be how that, at some point, we would love to see the data on how these partnerships are affecting the other metrics, right? Like, so our reading and, and I'm sure there are some anecdotal things you guys could share as well. But, since we are charged with looking at everything, I think that is, I would like to know, I think it's important that the partnerships are working in affecting our numbers in reading and math and things of those sort. But then also that community schools model, I made a note here. Based on what we saw from student needs, we started reaching out and creating partnerships. What could we do with that for teachers? does, do we think about what and I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit because we had like the yoga and the walks, but understanding that if our kids are going through some things, so are our teachers and our staff. So maybe it's not a full-blown community schools model, but it is also thinking, how can we wrap our arms around them as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, because, I mean, even when you think about our food pantries that we have, our clothing closets that we have, like, these resources that we have are for anyone in our community, and that includes not only our students, but our teachers. Anybody that is in need can have those resources. But continuing to look at that data, and just to do a little foreshadowing, we have been having conversations around like the measures, looking at the metrics, so that we can take a look at the impact that the community school strategy is having. So Dr. Henley's been working on that alongside Kelly Sperduto, and we've been having a lot of conversations around that. Hopefully, we'll be able to give you some more information on exactly what that looks like. You're supposed to really look at like 5 years of data, and in the middle of that, we had that big hiccup of the pandemic. But nonetheless, we think that we've done a lot of things, and hopefully we'll be able to do some, close measures of what that's looking like. A little foreshadowing, I do know that some of the perception data in the schools where we're implementing the community school strategy looks very favorable. So more to come.
I would add one piece about that too, and this is just a research-based point, is places where teachers feel satisfied and happy and fulfilled. Oftentimes, they may have things like, and efforts to provide self-care and mindfulness. Those are things. But what is the number one thing that is reported by teachers is that they actually trust their administrator. So I say that because I think it's really important when you look at the research, it's about trusting your supervisor. And so the idea that we're asking that perception data does matter, because we care about that, because if we're not getting numbers in certain areas, then we know it's a trust issue. So that gets into how we hire, really making sure that we're hiring people that are aligned with our values, that believe in these kinds of things. That makes the biggest difference. And that's still, that's big work that we're, ongoing. But I think it's an important point.
Mr. Bonnegoria?
Thank you. I want to follow up on the questions regarding community schools and that the connection, the community connections that we're working on, which I think is really great. And I think I may have heard Dr. Payne allude to the answer to my question, but it's a little bit hard to hear. I'm looking at the page 21, slide 21. I see a lot of great community organizations that are involved. Our students are wrestling with a lot of issues that range from physical, financial, emotional. Are we engaging with any faith-based organizations to make those an option available to students who may be interested in pursuing those organizations for help, or parents who may be interested? I'm just in the sense of finding those connections that are available to all of our stakeholders.
That's a really good question, and we do have a community school advisory board, and we meet 4 times a year, and we do have faith-based representation that sits on that advisory board committee, and it's really a wonderful place to be able to, for sharing of things, resources that are available, as well as listening to the needs of the areas that we've identified in community schools. So yes, they are at the table having those conversations. And we're always, always looking for expansion. So if you know of anyone, please let us know.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Dr. Trewick? You good? I'm good. Okay. I know you said you had 3 and I only got to 2. Anybody else? Ms. Farah?
Just a quick question regarding the perception surveys.
I know that we go through Panorama. How do you guys come up with the questions? Is this a collaborative? I know a lot of the questions have been, we've heard, they've been deemed, they could be misconstrued. So how do we come up with these questions to give to these students? Because I'm going to say, if I had my son take these, I would not get the same answers. A lot of kids like to tell you what they want to hear and just start clicking buttons. So I just want to make sure that we're actually getting correct data. And then when we're asking certain questions, they can't be misconstrued depending on where you're thinking. I mean, it should be just one way or the other, but depending on what you're saying, if you strongly disagree, we could have everyone say, we strongly disagree on everything, but from each lens, it might be completely different. So how do you work all of that in?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so to answer your first question about where we get the questions, so for the perception surveys in particular, those are mostly based on the New York State survey that was given along with the ESSA designations in their package. So that was our basis. But this past year, we've worked to try to consolidate, like we're trying to eliminate survey fatigue. And we had a bunch of different surveys that asked similar questions. So we tried to consolidate those, but it's still largely based on the climate survey from New York State. So a team of us worked over the summer and into the fall to consolidate the surveys, but then also look to see, like, as a user, as an end user, would this question be understandable to you? Would the answer choices be understandable to you? Would the way that they're weighted on the Likert scale, would that give us what we're looking for in terms of data that could lead to an action step? So that was the process we used to put our best foot forward to make a really clear, understandable survey that would give us the results we wanted. But I think it's fair to just validate your point that, you know, we have thousands of users in the district. Some may have a differing perspective on what agree versus strongly agree sounds like or looks like for this question, and what agree or disagree or strongly disagree may look like for that question. So that's a valid point too, but we did consider those types of things while we were crafting the survey.
Mr. Bonagario?
Thanks, sorry. I need a little clarification on the iReady data on pages 8 and 9, where we have students meeting expectations, and it's updated 3 times a year. Are the benchmarks for whether or not they're meeting expectations in each of those timeframes the same benchmarks? I guess I'm not understanding why year after year they start at a low level and work their way up, unless there's one benchmark that's being used and they haven't been taught some of the material. Can you help me understand what I'm actually looking at there?
Yes, Mark. Sorry, Todd Smith here. For the iReady benchmarks, in the fall to be considered proficient or at grade level, they have to be within at least fall of the grade level they're at. So a concrete example I would give, a third grader would have to be considered early grade 3 to be considered proficient, which is hard for a third grader who's just entering in. So you see that level pretty low. And then as the year goes on, by the winter benchmark, you have a higher percentage. By the end of the year, they have to be at least at mid on grade level or higher. So then the next year kind of falls back because they've now entered the next grade and they got to be achieving 4th grade. So it kind of resets that baseline for growth. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, it does. Thank you. And we've got great trends in that regard.
All right, with no other questions, thank you all very much. Moving on to the next item, 4.02, the budget update debt service. Superintendent Groutman.
Yes, I'll turn it right over to Romeo. Oh, excuse me. I'll turn it right over to Romeo to give us that update.
Thank you. So we'll take a quick look at our debt service budget recommendation for 23-24 school year. Again, it's just one component of our budget, but it's worth taking a peek at. So what is a debt service budget? It's the funds we need to retire all our long-term debt on payments for items that are listed here, our bus purchases, and primarily our capital projects that we've had over the last several years, including Reimagine Greece that is ongoing at this point in time. As we look at what's been issued and outstanding at the current time, first column, we've got about $179 million of original debt that we have issued, with about $109 million of that currently outstanding. So one of the things that we always bring up at this point in the year is how does that, is that good or is that bad, is a question that comes up. So by statutory limit, the district has a cap of 10% of the assessed value of the school district's property. As of June of last year, the school district assessed value was about $4.83 billion. So that means our cap is $483 million is where we could land and still be within compliance with state law. At $179 million, we're at about 37% of the limit before any state comes in, and that's on the issuance side. When we look at the $109 million on what's currently outstanding, similarly, we're at about 18.5%, 19% before state aid. If you took into consideration state aid that we would get on that $109 million, we're probably in the 8 to 9, 9 to 10% limit on our $483 million. So overall, although those are big numbers, percentage-wise, we're really in good shape compared to what the law would provide us to be at. Looking at our payments for this year and the next year, 22-23 total, we're going to pay out about $19.2 million of this year for the various projects listed on the left. For next year, we're going to be down about $575,000. We're looking at a debt service budget of about $18.6 million. Just a quick pie chart on what the debt service looks like. Our largest portion is our Reimagine Greece at 43%, followed by our capital improvement projects at 32%, and coming in third is our capital improvement project from 2015. So what's the local share that will be included in the levy is what this is trying to represent. So for 23-24, you can see the projects on our debt service comes to the $18.6 million. We are projecting that we will receive $14.9 roughly million in state aid on those projects as shown on the slide, which will leave us about $3,690,000 local share that is not funded at this point. And again, here's how we got there. It's taking the $18.6 million, taking out the building aid that we expect for $12,751,000. We also get transportation aid on our buses for $2,134,000. That leaves us a net local share at this point of $3,690,000. However, we also will do a transfer from our debt service fund for about $1.1 million, which will bring the capital exclusion portion of the levy to $2,579,000. And that is the number when we went out several years ago with Reimagine Greece. We said we would keep the local share of the levy at about $2.7 million or less. And this is how we get there. And we've been able to do this year after year after year, and we will continue to do it to keep us under the $2.7 million. So there's no additional cost on the levy above what it was prior to Reimagine Greece being approved. Okay, so the tax exclusion, capital exclusion is $2.6 million. And then this is just a rough look at how it balances out. The top are the expenditures of where we will spend the $18,577,000, primarily bond anticipation notes, which are the bands, or serial bond payments, which are listed as here as bonds. and below is how we're going to pay for it. So we will obtain $2,579,000 from the tax levy. We'll get $12,751,000 from building aid, $2.1 million from transportation aid, plus the transfer from the debt service fund for $1.1 million balances out our debt service payments for next year.
Questions? All right. Moving on to item 4.03, tax cap update. Superintendent Grauman.
Yes, Romeo's going to stay standing. Well, we think about the tax cap, and I think what comes to mind typically for community members is this idea of 2%. There's actually a great deal of math and calculation that goes along with this. So what we do each year is really do a pretty thorough explanation so that the board and all of us understand sort of the method and where we land each year. So I'll turn it over, Romeo, to you to share that with us.
Thank you. So tax cap, this is the 12th year of the tax cap, and it's now permanent, so it is an item that many were hopeful would go away, but it will not go away, so it is now permanent, and we will deal with it every year. So the tax cap calculation, again, just to reiterate, it is how we calculate the total levy, not the assessed value or the tax rate for 23-24. It simply helps us calculate what that tax levy should be. Each school district will be impacted differently by this because each school district has different pilots, different debt service, and a variety of other items. So if you're comparing with your colleagues or your neighbors on what is your maximum allowable limit per percentage-wise, it will be different amongst each district because of a variety of different factors in there. So just to talk about a couple factors. Tax-based gross factor is provided to us by the Department of Taxation and Finance. It represents new construction in the district, does not include pilot payments. And for 23-24, our tax growth factor is 1.0022. Last year, it was 1.0037. This is just a chart that since this has been in play, of what the tax-based growth factor for Greece has looked like. Very sporadic in the early years. What you see from about 2017-18 school year is a slight trend upwards in our growth. The overall trend line, the green line there, is a decline. But and this is one of my sticking points, is pilots. You remember from the previous slide, pilots are not included in the growth factor, and pilots are payments in lieu of taxes. And we have had several senior living communities built in the district over the last 5 or 6 years, 7 years. They're not included in here because they're not allowed to be included by law. If they were, I believe our growth factor would be much higher than what it is currently. This is what our tax-based growth factor looks like compared to the other districts in Monroe County. We're here in green near the tail end. The high is Spencerport. It was so high, I had to ask what the heck was going on there. It's primarily Amazon. So they've got that Amazon distribution center. It is being built, so the value of that facility went up $100 million last year, and it went up another $100 million this year. So it has pumped up Spencerport's growth factor significantly. The average you see across the blue line is about 1.0075, and for Greece, again, we're at 1.0022. And then this is specifically for Greece, just to take a quick look. How does our growth factor look like to the county average? And you can see every year we're below the average, yet there is a trend of increase over the last 6 or 7 years. I mentioned pilot payments. They're payments in lieu of taxes. They're authorized by the Monroe County Economic Development Agency. Through these agreements, properties are exempt from taxes based on their assessed value, and they're usually paid on a fixed schedule or a percentage of assessed value on that year. And we're usually notified of those. We have schedules in our office, and that's how we kind of project out what they will be. I did want to bring up a couple new items that are pilots that we have been made aware of. One is Life Cycle North America. This is a lithium battery recycling organization, so they'll recover lithium, nickel, and cobalt out of recycling batteries. And they have plants in Ontario, Arizona, Alabama, Norway, and they have picked Rochester to be their Rochester hub for New York. The total investment is somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 or $400 million into this facility, so it is really significant to have them come here. The current assessed value of the land is $665,000. The 23-24 assessed value is $66 million, but it's projected that there'll be about a $208 million building when they're all complete and done. So that has bumped up our pilot payments. We also have a new pilot at 120 Marina Drive. That's a professional office space building. It's about 22,000 square foot of office space over on Canal Ponds Business Park. They're currently assessed at $70,000 on the land. They will go to $2 million for 23-24 with a projected assessed value of about 2.6 or $2.7 million. Our existing pilot of significance is South Park Development, which is basically Amazon. In 22-23, they were assessed at about 2.7. That is being completed. They're at about $54 million. And then we've got several pilots that will be coming off of the pilot schedules and going back on the tax rolls. And that's DMD, Nissan, Bryan Stratton, and North Forest Properties. Another primary factor is the allowable growth factor. Again, that's that 2% or CPI, whichever is lower. And for the current year, the allowable growth factor will be capped at 2% for the tax cap. CPI is somewhere between 6 and 8%, depending on which CPI you use, but it's significantly higher than the 2%, but we will be capped at 2% for 23-24. This is, again, just a chart on where we've been since the tax cap inception. Out of 12 years, 6 years, we've been capped at the 2%. 5 years have been less than 2%. And we had actually 1 year in 2016-17 where the CPI was basically zero. Another factor is the tax levy to pay for capital costs, the capital exclusion. Now, what that is in the calculation is we take all our debt, which we just reviewed, that $18.7 million worth of debt. How much are we going to get back in state aid? And the difference between those two is added to the levy, and we have been managing that amount to be less than $2.7 million, as we said several years ago. A couple years ago, they also allowed BOCES to do the same thing, so now there is a BOCES capital exclusion portion of it as well, and I'll show you that in a second. So how do we get to our local district capital costs? So we start with that debt service number we reviewed previously, $18.6 million. Take out the building aid, take out the buses, the bus aid that we get back to that 3.7 million, which gets us to 2.579 for the local cost. Further, we have to add in the BOCES expenditures of $1 million to that, but we will also get BOCES facility aid for $826 million. So that will make our local capital exclusion in the tax levy to be $2,815,000. Of that, 2.5 million, 2.6 will be our capital cost. The remaining balance is the BOCES capital cost. So then bringing this all together, this is just a quick view of the calculation. We start off with the current year levy for 22-23. You see the tax base growth factor for 1.0022. We Add in our pilots from last year for 22-23. Our local capital cost, our BOCES capital costs are taken out. We then get down to line 7, where it's the 2% CPI. And then we take off, actually, the upcoming pilot payments. But one note is that if you look at the pilots for 22-23, they were about $1.1 million. They are now about $1.5 million. That $400,000 difference is those new pilots that came on the books. That gives us a tax levy limit of about $119.4 million. If we add in the upcoming capital exclusions for both the district and BOCES, it's $2.6 million and $235. For BOCES, it gives us a maximum allowable tax levy for 23-24 of $122,236,140. That's an increase of $2,000,005, almost $2,000,006, $2.1 million, or represents an increase of 1.76% increase in the levy. If we go out at the maximum allowable levy here at 122.2, we will be in compliance with the tax cap requirements, and we will need 50% plus one vote in order to have the budget approved. If we go over this amount by even $1, we have to get a supermajority or 60% vote within the district. We have to submit this calculation into New York State by tomorrow, so I'll have that done tomorrow sometime. And we're going to be meeting with the town of Greece on March 7th, I believe, to review what is going on with the assessed values in their process, since kind of everything changed last year. So we're going to see where they are this year, meet with them for a couple hours, and then bring back an update to the board on March 21st on how this may impact the rate or the assessed value.
I guess my question is, if in this case, right, they're getting 90% off, right? Is the way it'll come back is, if they're supposed to pay $5 million in taxes, they're paying $500,000 now. As soon as that expires, on that day, that would become that adjustment item on that last schedule that says like prior year pilots?
Yes.
And we would get another $4.5 million credit
Yes, on the
in that
tax
example.
rolls. We go to the tax rolls. The only caution I would say is the year, if it's supposed to end on June 30th, you would think on July 1, it would actually make it back on the tax rolls. We've seen where it takes 18 to 24 months. So I think that's one of the items the governor is trying to propose somewhere deep in her budget, is to move this along much quicker, because sometimes they sit out there in limbo and you don't really get what you're worth. But theoretically, yes, June 30th, it should come off the pilot. So for the following school year, it should hit the tax rolls, and now you're getting the full value of the building. And it's a change to the plus and the minus for the following year.
Got it. Is the Amazon one 10 years? Was that?
15, I believe it's 15.
Okay.
It might even be 20. I know it's at least 15. I think that one might be 20.
Okay, thanks, Romeo.
Any other questions? All right, seeing them, moving on to the bus replacement recommendation. Superintendent Groutman.
Yes. So as you all know, we have a huge fleet of buses, and every year we put forward some recommendations in terms of how to replace our buses and recommendations in terms of how to pay for that. So Romeo's going to share that with us now, too.
And I'm going to have Janine help me out with this one. So I'm going to have her do, and we're going to split this.
Good evening. What we'd like to do tonight is take you through our recommendation for bus replacement, share with you the process that we go through annually to determine what we're going to recommend to you, address some of the issues, and considerations that are factored into this, and there are a number of those this year. We'll review the specific recommendation, the costs, and the resolution that you'll be asked to adopt later in March. That will be presented to the voters on May 16th. So since 2017 and 18, we have been recommending the purchase of gas buses, which was a transition away from all diesel fleet. That process in the 2016 school year looked at propane buses, gasoline buses, and made the recommendation to move away from diesel to gasoline buses for efficiencies, for standardization of product along replacement parts and such, and to facilitate greater efficiencies, not only from the repair and maintenance of the buses, but consistency for drivers moving from one bus to another. We continued that process over the next several years, and in 2017-18, 2021-22, we recommended the use of minivans to add to the fleet as well. Again, this was all in consideration of the input from drivers, attendants, and mechanics, as well as other transportation staff. Romeo's going to address some of the considerations, and there have been many this year.
So just some items to think about. The state mandate for zero emissions. This is a huge one that has recently come up in the governor's budget. It's the requirement that we start buying electric buses, all districts, not just us, start buying electric buses in 2027 and convert all of our buses to electric by 2035 with a possible extension on it. We've got a committee that's working on that, and there are several of us actually, call it taking a class on electric buses every month and trying to learn as much as we could. But that is an item that is out there that we have to think about. The infrastructure and the overall fleet configuration is something we always look at. And one of the items that's, that is prompting our recommendation for there is bullet point number 3 here. So large gasoline buses from our preferred vendor, who is Leonard Bus. We usually buy 15 large buses every year. They will, after 23-24, so in 24-25, they will not make a large gasoline bus. We're not even certain they'll make a large gasoline bus in 25-26. They believe they will have one, but we're not certain. So that is an item that we've been considering as well, plus the continuing transition away from our diesel buses and the availability of minivans. So these are all the items that we've taken into consideration in making the recommendation. One item I did want to point out is the order with the supply chain issues that we've had. The order for minivans in 2021 is actually canceled by the dealer. You cannot find a minivan anywhere. So we still have authorization to buy 3 that we can use within the fleet, but we can't find any. So we are starting to look into the possibility of can we buy a used minivan as opposed to having to get a used one. So that's something we will come back to the board and update later, but just to share what the struggle is with the supply chain. It's not just books and buildings and grounds, it's vehicles as well, as everybody here knows. So with that being said, we normally purchase 25 vehicles a year. That's what we have done for the last 8 or 9 years. The recommendation for 23-24 is to actually buy 35 vehicles. We would buy 23 large buses from Leonard. We typically would buy 13 or 15, but we are looking to buy 10 additional large buses in 23-24, and then not purchase any large buses in 24-25, and skip a year on the large buses. And that would give us time to see where this electric bus mandate and initiative is kind of going, but it would not. If we buy the 10 now, it'll still keep us steady with our fleet for a couple, 2 or 3 years without having to worry that we've got buses that are 13 or 14 years old that we're jumping money into. So we're looking at 23 70-passenger buses, 8 30-passenger buses, 2 wheelchair buses, and 2 minivans. We would be trading in 33 of our older buses to keep the fleet current. And again, we'd purchase no buses in 24, 25, no large buses. Another point to make is our smaller bus vendor, New York Bus Sales, they do make a large bus, but it's not our preferred bus. So we've also talked about a lot, do we buy our large buses from the other vendor? And we've come to the conclusion that it's not worth it, because then we'd have a set of buses that we'd have to have separate parts for, different type of work on, and to keep the fleet standard. So as we've done over the last 15 years, we'll buy 10 extra from the current vendor, hold off, see where things go, and then make our decision going forward in a couple of years.
So to that point, we're recommending, as Romeo said, 23 70-passenger buses at a unit cost of $164,471, 8 30-passenger buses for $98,315, 2 wheelchair buses for $127,696, and 2 minivans at an estimated cost of $45,000. I wanted to share with you the cost changes for this recommendation compared to where we were previously. And since 2019-20, we were buying 63-passenger buses for $121,000. In 2020-21, we paid $123,000. In 21-22, it was $125,000. In 22-23, it's $132,000. We're seeing not only a shift in the availability, but we're seeing a shift in the cost substantially. This represents about 24% increase in the cost. Similar changes on the 30-passenger, $62,000 in 2019-20, $63,000 in 2021, in 21-22, $64,000, 22-23, $67,000. We're looking at $98,000 for that similarly situated bus. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we saw 24% increase on the large bus, a 46% increase on the 30-passenger bus, the wheelchair bus, 49% increase, and the minivans, again, those are estimated costs because you can't get them, of 55%. This recommendation costs a total of $4.9 million. We're going to finance it over a 5-year period with debt service payments beginning in 23-24. We get about 78% state aid on those purchases. We'll use the capital bus reserve to offset the local share, and state aid payments will be matched. We've worked directly with our financial advisors to strategically align the timing of the purchase and delivery with the borrowing that occurs so that the debt service payments that occur over the 5-year period are aligned and matched to the state aid. And additionally, we use that information to strategically identify the amount of the reserve that we're going to be utilizing to make that a zero net cost to the taxpayer. And finally, what we have for you here is the actual text of the resolution. The resolution, if the board adopts this proposal, would be presented to district residents on May 16th to authorize the district to purchase 30 70-passenger buses, 8 30-passenger buses, 2 24-passenger wheelchair buses, 2 minivans, and for the use of $1.72 million of capital bus reserve to make this a zero cost to the taxpayer.
Questions? All right, we'll start with Mr. Swicky.
So one of the questions on the trade-ins, right? I know it's tough to estimate a value on that, but assuming we got a value back, does that go against the bus reserve, or does that go back into the general fund? What's your thoughts on how that plays?
The trade-ins are offset against the cost of the bus. So if you take the $4.9 million, reduce it by the $1,720,000, I think, for the reserve, it'll leave a number. From that number, that would be the max that we would go bond but we will then work with the vendor to trade in and get a number, reduce that down to another number, and then only bond for the lower number, and the vendor would take the buses in on trade and then deal with them.
So the resolution as proposed is a worst-case scenario, as if you got
Correct. It's the
$0
high-
on your
correct. It
trade-in.
does not consider, the resolution does not consider trade-ins.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Maloney? All right. Mr. Bonnegorio?
Am I understanding correctly that the state's conversion mandate is a mandate to not purchase buses or to not use non-zero emission buses
It's,
after?
so beginning in 2027, the way the mandate currently reads, we cannot purchase after 2027. We must begin purchasing electric buses starting in 2027, but we can continue to use gas buses and diesel buses and propane buses through 2035, but after 2035, you can no longer purchase or use a non-electric bus.
Thank you.
Mrs. Farmer?
Hi, Rowena.
Microphone.
How about the infrastructure that would be needed for the electric buses? What is the plan for that?
We don't have one yet. So we are, I will say, we are ahead of many districts on it. We've taken an active role in visiting the electric bus facilities. A group of us went out and looked at RTS. We have an electric bus committee. We're taking, I'll call it a class once a month and learning on how we need to cost out these items. It goes through June. And then we're going to probably recommend to the board that we hire a firm to come in, depending on what happens with the legislature this year, on where if they're going to continue with the initiative and the mandate, and ask the board to approve a study that will pull all that information together in terms of what will it cost to, for all the electric, what will it cost for the transformer, how many chargers do we need, what type of runs do we have, you know, a variety of different things. So we are learning that now. And even for the part that we've learned, it gets complicated and confusing very quickly. So we're not sure. There's still some hesitation, I would say, amongst, even I think maybe at the state level, with some people around the feasibility of really doing this in such a short order of time. Does that help you?
Does anybody have any questions before I go? Oh. Dr. Traywick?
Okay, so, is this just taking a look at the recommendation, so we approve this, if we approve this resolution, is this for last year really that we're gonna buy buses? Because you said 24, large buses. So you said 24, 25, we're not gonna buy large buses, right? Then the governor's proposal says that we can't purchase anymore in 27. So if the proposal stands, this is the last time that we will purchase.
It could be. It could be. The one out, if it stands the way it is now, is a district can apply for a 2-year extension once.
Okay.
So we could apply from 2027 to 2029 to give us time to build some type of infrastructure to start converting buses to electric.
Anybody else have any questions before I go? Megan, Ms. Farr?
Thank you. Romy, I love the fact that this is not going to cost the taxpayers anything. I am actually on board with purchasing the extra buses because of the fact, I hope we're giving the state a lot of pushback regarding the bus replacements. I don't see how this is feasible at all. Many different areas of why it wouldn't be. If this does, what does this look like for us? I mean, I know this is years out, but no way in the circle of this is any part of it feasible. So I don't even, I'm assuming you're pushing back hard on this.
From our level, the groups that we talk to, we bring up all the questions that most don't have answers for, but we're not the only ones bringing it up. It's coming. I would say from the feel that I get, 50% are totally for it, 50% are totally against it. So it's hard to really say which way this would go. One of the items, I think, I don't know if it's a proposal or it's already come out, but we have to start reporting this August and every August 1st to the state as to where we are with our electric, not only us, every district in the state has to report every August 1st a survey of where you are, what are you doing, how you getting there, and are you putting a plan together? Where that goes, I don't know. I'm not even sure how we fill out the one for August 1st, because we're nowhere near really doing anything other than learning. And we're 100% ahead of many others in the area that have really done not much. So it's going to be, one of the biggest issues, and we've talked about with different people recently, is the footprint. And I brought this up, Dave and I have brought this up with the group, our cohort that we're doing this with. We just built this facility. We got $27 million into this facility that's brand new, and we've got everything we need barely fitting on the footprint. Now you've got to add 200 chargers, and they all have space requirements. 220 buses plus another 50 or 60 pickup trucks and vans and B&G. We don't have enough footprint on that plot of land in order to do this. Even if we had a bucket of money to pay for it, I don't think we could fit it in one. So nobody can answer that question for me. And is there enough power? And where's it coming from? And how do we get it to two places? There's just so many questions that I'm sure the push will continue. I'm just not certain
Well, if they need
how
any extra
everybody's
voices.
going to be able to keep up. So, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, if they need any extra voices, I'm available.
Okay.
But I'm definitely the 50% not opposed to this. So I will leave it at that, but thank you very much.
I just want to add two things. One is we have already, so right here, our folks, Romeo and Dave, have already put talking points together that really consider a lot of the points that have been brought up here, that was shared with the Board of Education. That was shared so that you all use it and use your platform in terms of advocacy. I've met with Senator Cooney, shared that document, and we'll continue to make sure we get that out. But it's got to be more than just Romeo, because the context is different depending on where you are. If I'm a small district and I have 30 buses, it's not as big of a deal for me, and I probably have less of a need or reason to advocate versus a large district with a fleet our size and with this current space. It's a much different beast in terms of trying to implement something like that. So it is important in terms of advocacy, but it also needs to be done through school boards, through our legislators, and obviously us as well. So just important.
Mr. Bongorio.
So are we taking any coordinated actions to communicate with our local representatives as a board? Or is it, I know we have a lobbying day, but is there anything proposed for just our local folks?
I can probably answer that in a minute. And we'll see
Thank you.
where we go. Okay, Dr. Traywick.
So I won't speak on the advocacy efforts. I'll let Sean do that. But there.
Oh, no, feel free. I'm going to propose something from our standpoint.
Okay. So in terms of advocacy, as Kathy said, we're not the only district. I'm a member, well, we're all members of the Monroe County School Boards, but that's made up of like all the districts, and pretty much, everyone is saying the same things, that, this is not feasible. The word on the street, quote unquote, is that RG&E can't even handle the infrastructure. Like, if this goes through, RG&E, our energy providers, are saying they don't have the energy to sustain this. So in terms of pushback, Megan, it is coming from everywhere. So I just wanted to put that out there. But the second thing is, this is a point of confusion for me, so I hope you can clear this up, or someone can. So at one of the tables, when we were discussing this electronic bus mandate, it came up that it doesn't just, the mandate doesn't just call for electronic buses. It says zero emissions. And so there are other ways to get to zero emissions. But then, so my question is, what are those ways? Because the conversation stopped at that point.
The only other alternative is hydrogen fuel cell, and it does not exist right at this point in time.
Not the buses.
We have a local firm, Hyzon, I believe, out in Honeoye Falls. Dave had gone out there to visit with them. It's feasible, it can work, it's probably less cost than electric, probably more reliable, but it doesn't exist. And it may exist down the road to a large volume, but right now, it's not feasible.
Mr. Bonagorio.
I know natural gas buses are not zero emission, but they are a potential, something to shoot for as an alternative. Have we looked into that at all, just on a hypothetical basis?
Yes, so Dave and I have, in the forums that we've been at, and others have asked indirectly through legislatures or other parties, could they change the law from zero emission to near zero emission, which would then make natural gas and propane feasible, because it'd be very close. My gut reaction is there's no intention of changing the law at this point to go to near zero. They will leave it at zero emissions, which precludes propane, natural gas, and really only makes electric the only viable source at this point. Our fear is that you start to go down this electric road in 5 years, and then 6 or 7 years from now, hydrogen fuel cells become a viable source, and we would have gone that way, but now you've kind of passed the point of no return, and what do you do to convert then over to hydrogen? So this has been items that we've been pushing, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, at least at this point in time.
Any other questions? I have a lot. I've been chomping at the bit. Yeah, I just fundamentally, and several of my colleagues addressed concerns that I have. This is basically another unfunded mandate the state is handing down in 3 years, or 3 years, give or take, that there's no idea how we're gonna pay for it. I mean, let alone in 2027, we have to have electric buses, but how are you gonna pay for the infrastructure, like Dr. Trawick says, to have the proper electricity at this facility? And then from our standpoint, the footprint for that. So there's no idea. We crafted, I mean, Albany's great at this, just crafting things to do and have no plan how to implement it. So from our standpoint, the taxpayer standpoint, are we gonna have to come up with a capital project to build a substation and all the electric charging stations? And like you said so eloquent, Mr. Kalili, our footprint isn't big enough to do this. You know, so there's so much with that in and of itself that the state hasn't thought through to this point. And I mean, I have significant concerns with the ability for the grid to handle the charging. And what happens when a car hits the pole out front and the electric goes out, and now we can't charge our buses, so we don't have snow days anymore, we have electric days because our buses are all dead. So, I mean, there's zero thought in this. There's a bunch of people, I'm gonna be sensitive here and not say something I shouldn't say. People in Albany that make laws and make decisions that they have no realistic idea of how it's gonna impact a school district like ours with 225 buses. It's not practical, it's not feasible, it's not even currently possible for this to happen. Somebody came up with it. I can come up with a lot of great ideas that aren't possible and feasible, but we came up with this, and now school districts are left like, what do we do? How are we gonna pay for this? Where's this next move? What do we plan? I mean, you know, at some point, this board is gonna be talking about another capital project. This could be the biggest component of that capital project, but yet we don't know. And that's just criminal. I know, and maybe you or Mr. Richardson can answer this, The last I saw electric buses, and I don't know, minivans, maybe you have this, Janine, or the smaller buses, or Dave, you have it. The cost, the last time I saw was about $120,000 more for an electric school bus as opposed to a gas or a diesel bus. Is that still running about the average?
That's about right. A large bus is about 150, an electric school bus is about 400, 350 to 400.
So I guess my concern is, and you guys made a proposal, and I have some reservations with it about not purchasing buses, any large buses in 24, 25. Are you guys comfortable with that? Is that, we think we're gonna be okay longer term, or right, as of right now? I mean, obviously, next year, we can have, you know, the board can have this discussion again and maybe change that?
So, the buses, the oldest buses, and Dave, you correct me if I'm wrong here, the oldest buses we have are 2014s and 15s, and I think some 16s. If we go with this plan, we'll get rid of all the 14s, 15s, and I believe some of the 16s, which will then give us 17s and newer. So if we had to then go a second year without buying a large bus, we could potentially do it. It's not ideal to go 2 or 3 years without a bus purchase, but if we're in this gray area, we're not sure what to do, we will be in much better shape to be able to do it by getting rid of the 14s, the 15s, and some of the 16s.
And I guess my follow-up question on that is, will those buses have any trade-in value at that point? And I guess my understanding of electric vehicles is when the battery dies, or the battery goes bad, burns, whatever, the vehicle's done. You know, correct?
Yes.
So from as long as I can remember, and you and Janine may know this, we've had this bus reserve purchase account that we reserve, that we've used, you know, to fund buses, so there's no taxpayer share. Well, now looking, if we purchase 20 or 25 buses at $200,000 more, that's an additional $4 million. Are we gonna be in a position to fund a bus reserve to replace the number of buses we need with an additional $4 million? I mean, I don't know if you even, you and Geneva even wanted to open that door yet, but I mean, for me, that's a significant concern of where we're gonna go at that point. How are we gonna do that as a district? Or are we gonna have to go to the taxpayers and say, not only you gotta pay for the charging, not only you gotta pay the extra for the buses, well, now we can't fund the buses like we used to, where there was zero impact on the taxpayer because of a state mandate. I mean, this state mandate has the potential to cost school districts millions and millions of dollars, and it just doesn't, it's not practical. So with that, I'm done on my, well, I'm not quite done, but I'm done on my little bit of soapbox right now, because this, probably of anything the state has done, I think is one of the most idiotic things they've put on school districts in my time. What I would like my colleagues to do, and I'm gonna put this in the form of a motion, is have our school board send a letter opposing the governor's mandate and the state's mandate on electric buses, to do more research, to figure out how the funding is gonna go, all of the components we've discussed tonight, to send it to our local delegation, including all of our local representatives, Governor Hochul, the SED, all the members of the Monroe County School Boards Association. I'm gonna put that in a form of a motion. Can I get a second on that? All right, well, that went better than I thought it was gonna go. I figured somebody'd say, no, Sean, you're nuts. But, so with that, we'll work on a letter, and it'll get obviously board approval before we'll talk about it at a later meeting, but we will work on a letter to send to our delegation. Thank you all. Thank you. I didn't mean to vent at you. I'm not
Never.
venting at you. I'm
No.
just frustrated with this whole process at this point.
problem.
So with that, we'll move on. Next
think-
item.
Sean?
Oh, sorry, Bill. Mr. Maloney?
As part of our discussions with electric buses, isn't it true that with the grant money that's available today, you have to have a trade-in of a bus that's at least 10 years old? And we don't have any buses that
And
will be
diesel.
10 years
And
old.
diesel.
It'd have to be a 10-year-old diesel bus.
Diesel? Okay.
All right.
Do we
In
have
order,
any
that's
10-year-old
10-year-old
buses?
diesel to get the full grant amount. Yes,
Thank you both.
thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to 5.01, the Reimagine Greece Capital Project Bid Awards. Can I have Sony move those to the table, please? Moved by Dr. Traywick, second by Mrs. Farmer. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 8-0. Can I have Sony move the change orders to the table, please? Moved by Vice President Morris, second by Mr. Sawicki. Any comments, questions, concerns on those? The only comment, Mr. Bonnegorio, go ahead.
Yeah, I am wondering, because the damages took place during the process of renovation, are those damages something that can be recouped to any degree?
Yes, we will do that. That's, I believe there might be one or two of those, and I think it says that we will back charge
It does.
the contractor for that. And the way we'll do that is we retain 5% of every payment that we make to them. So at the end of the project, we still hold a certain amount of money to ensure that they provide us all their closeout documents and all the other items that we need to finally close out the project. We will deduct what they owe for that change order from that amount.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the change orders? Okay, and those change orders amount to approximately $79,519. Budget status report, we got a vote. That little thing about voting. All those in favor? That passes 8-0. Moving on to budget status report. It's written information only. Does anybody have any questions? All right, with that, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. We'll all be back in 5 minutes. So, Mr. Bonnegorio, I don't know if you can hear me. Mr. Bonnegorio, you just got to make sure you're back on camera in 5 minutes. Thank you.
You got it. I'll just leave it on.
Plastic things, all they do is that, like $150 million. No, it's mostly domestic because they don't ship them out. Figure it out.
All right, we're ready to resume the meeting. I think we ran a little long. I apologize for that. Moving on to item 7.01, Treasurer's Report. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Maloney, seconded by Dr. Trewick. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 8-0. Can I have somebody move bids to the table, please? Item 7.02, moved by Mrs. Farmer, seconded by Vice President Malor. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 8-0. Can I have somebody move the 23-24 school calendar to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Farah, seconded by Mr. Maloney. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Mr. Swicky?
Thank you, President McCabe. As I was reviewing the calendar along with my family who saw it on the public board posting, had a couple questions come up, and I wondered if somebody from the district could entertain some answers on it. First was they looked at the last week of June and were concerned that the school year was going to stretch into that final week, and my younger constituents were concerned and wondered if there was any way to remedy that. Further, because they always come with a solution, they asked aloud, hey, why are we getting off on April 8th? Which I thought was an excellent question. And I wondered if there were any answers for my constituents that I could take home this evening. Thank you.
I have several points I'd like to make. April 8th is a total solar eclipse, so you can let them know that. That is why that day is off. In terms of ending the year earlier, we're going to give them an official spot on the calendar committee with Dr. Colicchio. And we're going to vow to them that if we don't use snow days, that we may be able to negotiate some work with the end of the year days. How's that?
Thank you.
However,
I appreciate your consideration, Superintendent Grotman. Thank you.
we will also need to email the Board of Regents because the last Regents exam, unfortunately, is on that last day.
Boo.
Trust that we would have gotten them out of here earlier if we could have.
And it's got to be chemistry, right?
Unfortunately, Mr. President, yes.
Yeah, story of my life. Oh, God. Yeah, you have no idea. You have no idea. All right, with that, all those in favor of the school calendar? That passes 8-0. Very good. Moving on to Superintendent Hearing Appeal Case Number 23-1. We're going to do a roll call vote on this. Mr. Bonagorio is going to abstain. I'm going to start with Mrs. Farmer.
Yes, I mean uphold.
Yep. Yes, yes is an uphold. Sorry. I didn't
Yes,
clarify.
uphold.
Mr. Maloney.
Yes, uphold.
Mrs. Farah.
No.
Can you microphone, please? Sorry, thank you.
No, decline.
Vice President Malor.
Yes, uphold.
Dr. Trewick.
Yes, uphold.
Mr. Sawicki.
Yes, uphold.
And I'm an yes, uphold, so that passes 6-1. Moving on to next item, 10.03, Residence Forum Discussion. Mr. Bonagorio.
Thank you. After our last meeting, I had a number of people contact me with some questions about what happened during the residence forum last time. I think we'll all be happy to know that we actually do have a number of community members who actually tune in to the various broadcasts, whether radio or YouTube. So there is interest out there, and that's a good service that we're providing. As most of you know, when I was communicating with the board prior to joining this body, one of my concerns was that there was a lack of dialogue. That's still a concern of mine, and in light of the questions that I received following last meeting, I want to ask a couple of questions. First, I want to point out that Board Policy 3220 states that the Board of Education, I'm quoting, "The Board of Education recognizes the importance of maintaining an open dialogue with the community by assigning an agenda item for public comment at the first meeting of each month." Later on, the policy says that at the first meeting of each month, a maximum of 32 minutes will be reserved for comments from Greece Central District residents, employees, or any other interested persons. End quote. I emphasize that the board's rationale for having such a policy is because the board, quote, recognizes the importance of maintaining an open dialogue. Board Policy 3170 specifies that whenever possible, a radio station, WGMC FM, it's a plug, will serve as a district communication tool by broadcasting such events and activities as regular Board of Education meetings. End quote there. And I emphasize whenever possible. Clearly, the goals in view are to make the public portions of school board meetings more accessible to the public. Policy 3220, again, clearly authorizes the board president to make some discretionary changes in the order of the public comment period and also to exercise his or her judgment regarding appropriate or inappropriate comments as defined in the policy guidelines. However, there is no language regarding the discretionary exclusion of residents' comments from the live and recorded broadcasts of the public meeting. Nevertheless, at last month's meeting, the residents' forum was moved to the very beginning of the public meeting agenda, even before the Pledge of Allegiance. It was still within the confines of the public meeting as required by policy, but it was blacked out of the live and recorded broadcast of the meeting without prior notice being given to the board as a whole and without consultation or vote by the board as a whole. In fact, several members of the board, maybe all of them, non-officer members, were surprised and perplexed by this change. This seems contrary to the requirements of Policy 3220, and it's certainly contrary to the board's stated desire in that policy and elsewhere of providing public dialogue, transparency, and open communication with our community. And it undermines our strategic plan's second commitment to cultivate trust, which we discussed earlier tonight. If anyone is interested, they can go back to last month's meeting, or the first meeting of this month, and for the first 7 or 8 minutes, see a blacked out screen that says the meeting will begin momentarily. In fact, the meeting had already begun, and it's a shame that our community members who were trying to watch the meeting online missed out on some very positive comments from community members. But whether comments are positive or not, the whole public should be allowed to hear the whole public meeting. So I asked 2 questions. Why was the residents' forum removed from the live and recorded broadcasts of our regular public meeting? And why was the entire board not consulted or informed about the decision? And I don't know who specifically I should address that question to.
That's me. I made a decision to not broadcast. You were right, you read the policies, but the policies do not say we're required, number one, to broadcast the residents' forum portion of it. And the problem that we've seen with residents' forum over the last period of time is basically you can get up and say whatever you want for 4 minutes, and it doesn't have to be true, it doesn't have to be factual. And I'll use a meeting from last year. We had a resident get up and she was swinging around a Greece Central sex ed curriculum. And she had her 4 minutes of fame, and then I asked at the end, I'm like, I'd really like to see that documentation because I was blindsided by it. And at the end of the day, she gave me a form, and it was a pilot program from a school district north of Oakland, California that was piloting this. So it wasn't a Greece Central, but she put incorrect and not factual information out to the community. The goal of Residents Forum is for residents to speak to the Board of Education. It's not for your 4 minutes of time out in the community saying something that may not be factual, that may not be true, which may be misconstrued or misrepresented. It's your opportunity to speak to the Board of Education, and the Board of Education then can choose to respond. The Board of Education can take it under advisement. The Board of Education can follow up with the superintendent and say, hey, are we doing this, or is there more to the story here? That's where the goal of Residents Forum is. The Residents Forum has changed in my time on the board, especially in the last 18 months, where people aren't speaking to the board. They're speaking to the community. They're speaking their 4 minutes and saying what they want to say to the community. They're not bringing their issues to the board. I mean, I will say there's been a few people that have brought issues to the board, but there's a portion of that public that is speaking in our meetings that wants that 4 minutes on YouTube to say whatever they want to say, and in some cases, we're not prepared to respond to that. Would I like to respond to everybody? Absolutely. And I guess if we go back as a board and start broadcasting, I'm going to start calling residents if they're lying, if they're providing infactual information, because that's not appropriate. I mean, if you want to say, I have a concern with our ELA scores, I know you had brought that up, or Mr. Milan, I believe, brought that up when he spoke. I have no problem with discussing ELA scores or your concerns with ELA scores. But when you start putting information out that you believe is factual to the community, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate because I heard through this person and I saw on Fox News and I heard this over here that this is what's going on in Greece Central. And now that's the information out there because as a Board of Education, we're not prepared to respond. I have no idea what you're going to say when you get up there. And I'm concerned with, there have been times some of our speakers have borderline been made racist comments and homophobic comments and other comments that have offended people for, I mean, I only heard from one person in regards to Residents Forum not being broadcast. I've heard from a lot of people about some of the comments that have been made in Residents Forum that we've publicly aired, that people sitting in this room that felt uncomfortable by the comments that were made. So, I mean, I think this is a happy medium for now, is to have residents come, speak to the board. We're not discouraging coming to speak for the board. You have 32 minutes, that's roughly 8 speakers. We could always grant more time, but the purpose is to speak to the board. It's not to put information out to the community that may not be factual or may not be correct. Does anybody else have any comments, questions, concerns? Mr. Bonagorio, do you want to respond? Since I directed my comments back to you, it would be appropriate if I let you respond before anybody else.
Yes, I would like to respond to that because I don't think it is the responsibility of the board president or any individual member of the board to try to discern what makes people feel comfortable or not. And I would hope that making the Board of Education feel comfortable in what they're hearing from many of our residents who have very serious concerns, whether about bullying or achievement, whatever. Whether it's good or bad, it's not our role to curtail the freedom of speech and the ability to share perspectives beyond the board. Yes, they're addressing the board, but this is a public forum, and it should be expected that that kind of information is going to go beyond the board, and that's part of the dialogue.
Mrs. Farmer.
So I'm good.
Yeah, he's done.
Okay, so I guess I would like to reiterate what Sean said regarding borderline hate speech. I also would like to say, and Mark, you've mentioned this before, that there's only one person on this board who's open to listening to people who might not have the same views. Yet at the same time, was it 2 years ago that we started community meetings at the Greece Public Library where people were invited to come? That would have been a perfect place to show that sex ed curriculum that you just mentioned. So we're in a small group, your people are, community members are interacting with board members, myself, Mr. Maloney, think Tammy, I think, was there. So this idea that the only place that dialogue can take place is during the actual board meeting, I can't agree with that, because the community meetings that we started, and once you were elected to the board, you said to me, oh, okay, so when are we going to start the community meetings again? And I said, oh, that's great, let's do it. And you said, no, I don't have to be a part of it. And I thought, well, that's odd. Why would you want only me to continue meeting with community when you were now representative of the board? So those are my concerns, that there are other avenues for people to interact with board members. And when children, my role on the board is to protect and help our children achieve all that they can. And when our children are hearing this borderline hate speech, that does not take care of our children. And I will not think that that's okay to just speak your piece because you're here and you're going to be talking to the board. Because it's not only the board, as Sean just said, this is getting out in the public. And there are things that are not true, that we know they're not true, and yet I'm hearing from community members, oh my gosh, did you hear about this sex ed that they're teaching in kindergarten? I'm like, what is not true? So this continues to boil and confuse the community. So if we are going to have this residents forum, and if the purpose is to speak to the board and say, hey, you know what, I heard about this sex ed curriculum, dialogue could certainly take place, and, you know, without being blindsided. And the idea that we want to, or some people want things to be different or taught differently, different curriculum, whatever you want to say within our schools, coming to the board and talking to the board about it, in my opinion, is where it needs to take place. This isn't, and if people want to come to the board meeting, let's open it up. Look at this huge space that we have compared to what we had before. Come to the board meeting, talk to us, work with us. Let's not divide people any more than we already have. So truth versus not truth is a huge concern. Hurting children is an even bigger concern. Those are the pieces that and once again, community meetings that were put in place about 2 years ago where you had access to board members, like right here, right next to us. You don't even need to stand up here. I've always said I do not like being up here on this dais because I think it separates us and it's difficult to communicate. But here was a perfect opportunity to have this meeting where people could come and speak. And for some reason, you didn't want to continue it. So that's where I'm at with this. Thank you.
I'm going to make a comment on something that Mrs. Farmer said, and I'm going to staunchly defend all 9 of us on this board. Every one of us listens to people. Everyone that only one board member listens, I take significant offense to that comment. I mean, we may not all agree, we may have different ways of getting there, but all 9 of us listen. We listen to people we agree with, we listen to people we don't agree with. So to put that perception, again, that perception out there that one board member is the only one that you can talk to is nonsense. We all have email. I return phone calls on my personal phone on a regular basis to people. I talk to people in the stores, as all of you do. So to say that we don't talk or that we're not listening, I take significant umbrage with as a board member, because I know all 9 of us, whether we agree or disagree on any topic, listen to people that agree with us and that don't agree with us. So I think that, I wanted to get that out there. I believe, Ms. Ferry, you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, it was kind of along the lines of what you were saying. I do think that we all listen. I do think resident forum is something that our community does need. It does help with the dialogue. Whether you're in, I eat, live, and breathe the school board. My family wants to kill me for that, literally. I do think that there are a few people that can be in the audience that can get a little rowdy, but that doesn't have anything to do with the speakers that are actually speaking. Some things can be misconstrued, but it is their 4 minutes to speak on the educational purposes. I didn't feel as if anything, and it's not my place to place judgment on whether someone feels that it's hate speech or not. They are entitled to their opinions, like I would be entitled to mine. So I do think that having the resident forum is something that should be done, which I don't, we're not getting rid of that, obviously. That's not up for discussion. So I just wanted to reiterate that we are all here, and just because we don't end up going to an outside event or meeting, there are others that can actually hold a meeting as well. Not everyone is going to be able to be there at all times, so I think that's a misconception as well. So that's what I have to say.
Dr. Shaywick.
So, first, I think that, I think it's good that Mr. Bonagario brought this up. I think that we need to have the dialogue out in the public about Residents Forum. I'm glad that President McCabe gave his reasoning why he made the executive decision he did. As far as my individual thoughts, I agree, we've never really talked about it, but there are people that have felt uncomfortable in the audience with certain comments that have been made. And the reality is, just as much as people want to have their right to speak, the people that are sitting in the audience also have a right to be able to attend a meeting and not feel targeted. So we're just putting that out there. So it's on both sides. Secondly, I think that if we are going to have, again, like Ms. Farah said, we're not talking about do we get rid of Residents Forum? What we're talking about is how we conduct it. How do we conduct it as adults that are responsible and that are conscious that there are souls, students, and community members that occupy these seats? And so as much as we are all motivated and passionate about what we think, we each have a responsibility when we go to this dais as residents to make sure that we're saying, that we're speaking in a way that we're paying attention to the room. And that hasn't been happening. So my recommendation when this came up was that not so much that we don't have it video, that it's not, I'm fine with it being broadcast. But I felt, and I'm going to put it forward to the board, that when people walk in the door, that they should be given the policy, and I know that they are made aware of the policy, but I suggested that, or I'm suggesting that they receive the policy, they sign off that they're going to abide by the policy, and what they're saying is they're going to be responsible for what they say. So if it becomes something that targets folks or that, is something that is untrue, then as much as it pains me to see someone's microphone turned off, that is what would happen to you. You will not be allowed to use this forum for your bully pulpit or to target folks or to give untrue information. So, in conclusion, I am for rebroadcasting public forum as long as the public is willing to come in and be responsible in the statements that they bring forward. Now, if it's something, as Mrs. Farmer said, if there's something that you want to approach the board about, we are, again, I think that we're all approachable. We're here after meetings. There are many times folks come and talk to us after meetings. If you feel like, well, I'm not sure, if my statements can be responsible and non-insulting or what have you, then approach us afterwards. But we are a community, and the more we tear each other down or make statements without even surveying the room is, I think is very irresponsible. And so what President McCabe did in terms of stopping the broadcast was a way to say, hey, let's stop. We don't want to keep the bleeding going. Even, I may not agree with that that particular stance. But now, I think if we are to vote on it, moving forward, we just need to be responsible about it, because something has to be done. We cannot continue to have folks come up here and be the way that they have been. You have to be responsible. And if you violate the policy, then your mic will get cut off, and then you won't be able to speak and be heard at all. So I think when people walk in that door, they need to think to themselves, who am I, what is my goal here? Is my goal to just shake stuff up? Because if it is, we're not shaking things up here. We are busy. We got stuff to do. The wrong Mr. Khalili, now I'm getting passionate. Cut me off if you have to. But Mr. Khalili just stood up here and told us that we have a freaking mandate on the table that's going to cost taxpayers maybe an additional $2 million, and we don't know where the money might come from. That's going to cut into everybody's pocket. Nobody's talking about that. We have Mr. Zaffitz and Dr. Payne and Dr. Colicchio and all these folks that stood up and that are continuing to tell us about our kids and the emotional state that they're in and all the things we need to continue to do to support families. And we are concerned about who can hear out in the public. Now, if that's what you're concerned about, that's what you're concerned about. But as far as this board goes, I'm sorry, I just took over. Just as far as I'm concerned.
Speak for yourself, please.
Yeah, as a board member, if you're going to have the privilege I don't get to come up here and say whatever I want to say. And I haven't said this out loud, but I have heard things on that dais that have made me particularly upset as a woman of color, as a person, as someone who actually is a patriot in this country and being a kid, all kinds of things in my 5 years. And I've sat here silently. I never got up and protested anything. I kept my mouth shut and I did my job, which was to protect the kids and the staff of this district. So now that people, they feel like their speech is being impeded, which it isn't. You're getting to speak to the board. We are the decision makers. But because the community can't hear, it's a problem. But if you want the community to hear, you got to change your behavior. That is what I'm proposing. So President McCabe, here we go. I am making a proposal that we go back to Broadcasting Residents Forum with responsibility statements that each person that comes in that door will sign, that they will be respectful, that they will make sure that their statement is not offensive period, and that they will abide by the rules and that it will be relevant to what the business is that we're conducting in the district, and that we as the board will have the oversight to cut the mic if it does not meet those ramifications. Thank you. Could you repeat? I can't repeat it.
I'm working. Hold on a second. Let me see if I got this before we go any further.
Should we have cut the mic as part of the policy?
Okay, so let's see if I have this.
But if we had said that in the beginning, that people were just not being responsible, maybe we wouldn't be here.
Well,
That's really no shade on you or nothing on you as the leader, but that's really what's happening, is that people are coming up here and they are, some folks, not you, Mr. Milan, but there are some folks that are coming up here and they are abusing the privilege. So I apologize to those of you who have not abused it and got caught up in this. And this hopefully will make a decision tonight that will reinstate it. And then we will see how the community rises moving forward to actually move responsibly. Sorry.
Nope, you're good. So basically, a motion by Dr. Trawick to resume the broadcast of Residents Forum, have the residents sign a form that they will abide by all rules in relation to Residents Forum, and if they fail to abide by said rules, since I'm the one, I'd have the ability to shut their microphone off.
Yes.
All right, is there a second on that? All right, with no second, the motion fails. We're back on to the discussion. Mr. Swiggy, I'll get to you in a minute, Mr. Bonagorio.
Were you calling
Mr.
on me,
Swicky.
Sean?
Sorry.
Sorry.
No,
Mr.
I'm not,
McCabe?
Mr. Swiggy. And then you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so on comments I was going to make just in regards to whether it's on video or not, right? For me, Residents Forum has always been about getting feedback, right? And when we broadcast those issues as part of Residents Forum, they do receive an elevated platform in the community. And one question that I would ask myself is, how is the opinion expressed in this forum in 4 minutes' time different than that conversation that we had in Wegmans, or the conversation with the theater mom, or the conversation on the basketball court, that doesn't get that same public forum because they're actually in the school doing something right then and there? And that doesn't mean don't come to the board meeting. Still come to the board meeting, right? But it doesn't work for everybody's schedule. And that feedback's just as important. Equally, I would say that feedback sometimes is equally ill-informed, right? So every feedback that we get at Wegmans, on the field, in Residents Forum, I'd say in some ways becomes fact-checked, right? It provokes thought, provokes a question that you then take back to the people in the know, right? And I would say the people in the know, it's tough, right? Because there's a lot of people, right? What do we have, 2,000 plus staff, 400 plus clubs, $265 million, where's it all go, right? There's a lot of questions and a lot of people who have a hand in a pot that don't have the complete answer. We would never have that answer here, at least in my view, in a residence forum. That's why we don't have dialogue. It's not appropriate. Similarly, I never give somebody an answer at Wegmans because I'm not sure, right? And I'm smart enough to know that, right? So I go back, I get my answer straight, and then I get you an answer with some truth behind it. And so for me, again, if the point is feedback, I think Residents Forum can carry on without video because it's already accomplishing that purpose. Dr. Trawick, to your point though, I kind of don't care because at the end of the day, Residents Forum is like a gnat, right? It's a thing that we have as part of our schedule because it's another form, a way to give feedback when you can't get access to the board otherwise, right? And I'd say, as President McCabe said, there's a million other ways to get a hold of us: email, phone call, et cetera. So to me, it's there. I can take it or leave it, video it or not, right? But at the end of the day, it's just another feedback loop, just like my neighbor, just like the mom, just like the dad, just like anybody else in the district. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Swiggy. I'm going to go to Vice President Malloy.
Anyone who knows me knows I'm a real rule follower, and I have the policy right here, and it clearly states that the purpose of sharing comments related to district's education programs, business, and operations. If that's what we were getting, that would have been wonderful, but things got so out of hand. And you're addressing the board, this is a business meeting, and we want to help solve your problem, but we were getting things that were so out of control, it didn't matter. I am concerned that people are using this as a way to get some public time. And I've seen YouTube, I've seen Facebook, people speaking on, it has nothing to do what the purpose of our board meeting is, the business of the district. Please email us, call us. We are out there and available. Talk to us at Wakeman's.
Thanks, Vice President Malloy. Mr. Bonagorio?
I would first like to address Mrs. Farmer's comments since she chose to publicly discuss a private conversation that she and I had. I'd like to address that. And I want to thank her because she was very early on one of the few people who tried to engage in dialogue with the community. And her proposal to have a meeting with a few members of the board was, I thought, a really good one, and I took advantage of it. And I hope that it can continue to go on. I will simply remind Mrs. Farmer that the reason I chose not to continue in that particular venue was because the other people the reason that she proposed starting it was that I was a part of the group of people that she was discussing with. And I thought it would be better for someone separated from them to have the conversation rather than for me to just continue as a board member to be in the same conversation. So it wasn't out of a lack of appreciation for her effort, and I hope she would continue to do it. And I would gladly join that kind of thing if it were. I'll do that again. I'll do that now. You want me to do it with the same people? I'll do it. I thought it would provide better perspective for them to be speaking to someone who wasn't kind of on their team. I'll just put it that way. So I think it's a great idea, Mrs. Farmer. Let's take it up again. I will also say that the reason I did not support Dr. Trawick's proposal a moment ago is one item in particular. I'm concerned when we try to define whose thought or whose statement is offensive. We get into a dangerous area of closing off speech. And I will simply say that a member of the board was accused of hate speech for expressing.
Your microphone cut out, Mark.
So I think we have to be very careful about making that kind of judgment. I would propose that if there is an option to refine that language about what's offensive, if there's a way to make that more objective and that it's not something that that violates our principles of free speech, then I could support Dr. Trawick's proposal. I think maybe she and I can have I'll invite anyone, but I'd be happy to engage with her to try to formulate a rewording of that.
I'm just going to comment on one thing you said, Mr. Bonagorio, and in regards to what's hate speech, what's not hate speech. The tough thing here is this isn't a bunch of private citizens. There's employees that are required to be in attendance. There's students that are in attendance. We have a job as a school district to provide a safe environment, to prevent a harassment-free environment for our employees. So it gets a little shady. What you and I might be okay with, because we're volunteers doing this position, it's not acceptable for people we're paying to have to sit and listen to it and be okay with it. It's not acceptable from a workplace. So again, part of my thought in doing what I did was I was trying to protect our employees. I was trying to protect the district from potential litigation from some of the comments our speakers were making. And again, it wasn't, as you said, you heard from a lot of people in regards to it. I heard from a lot of people that weren't happy with some of the dialogue that was occurring. And, you know, feelings were hurt. I mean, obviously Dr. Trawick, you know, had a lot of passion in her comments, you know, and I heard that from other people. And I mean, I think right now, I think this cooling off period is good. I think, you know, I would like to see us continue what we're doing for the time period. And let's see how things go before we make a decision and reinstate broadcast of Residence Forum. Residence Forum's still here. There's nothing in education law that says we're required to have a Residence Forum, and there's definitely nothing that says we have to broadcast it. It's something the board, like you said, we value residents' input. But that input is directed at us. It's not a time for you to get your point out to the community. That's not what Residence Forum's designed for. It's for your opportunity to come and bring your concerns to the Board of Education. And for the 9 of us that are here to listen to your concerns and maybe ask some follow-up questions through the administration, have a discussion amongst ourselves, maybe look and say, hey, we have to do something in regards to X. Or we already know there's a problem with X. But I think giving people a platform where there's no rein whatsoever, I think is a problem. Nowhere in the world, except for a Degree Central Board of Education meeting, can you walk in and say whatever you want to say about whatever you want to say. That's a problem. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't want to see Degree Central School District all over the news because of a comment somebody makes. I don't want to see them embarrass themselves. I don't want to see them embarrass the school district. I don't want to have kids sitting here if something offensive gets said. I learned a new term 2 weeks ago that if a person would have said that one of our students used to an administrator that I'd never heard in my life, and I think I've heard pretty much every term that you can imagine, and I heard a term that if somebody would have said it at a board meeting, it's racist and offensive, anti-Semitic, it's hate speech, it's used by the white supremacist groups, and if somebody would have said it here at a board meeting until I researched what the term was, I would have had no idea and I would have let it go. So I do have some concerns right now, Mr. Bonagorio, with allowing the speech. We're letting them come and speak to the Board of Education, but my view is I think let's give it a few months and see how things go, and we can reevaluate over the summer and see what we want to do moving forward. That's my position at this point. Does anybody else have any other comments they'd like to make?
I just want to clarify one thing.
If you're going to get in a back and forth with Mark, I think that's went far enough.
It's not a back and
Okay,
forth.
all right.
So what I'd like to say is, yeah, I think that's worthy of discussion. I do think the cooling off period. I also think that something else that we could do is when people call to speak, they say what it is that they're going to speak about.
They do, and Debbie reads a whole set of requirements for them, what they're
Okay.
supposed to talk about, the whole thing. They come in, it's posted here when they come in. I mean, so all of that's there
Okay.
already, you know, and people are just choosing to not do that. So again,
Okay.
I made the decision to protect us as a board and to protect the Degree Central School District and to protect our people that are here in the meetings, that this isn't the way that we should be doing it right now, and I think a cooling off period is good. I apologize for not notifying you guys all ahead of time. You know, that's on me. In the future, I will make sure that information like that is forwarded. With that, does anybody have anything else before we wrap up for the night? Mr. Bonagorio?
I'd like to propose that we restore the broadcast of the Residents Forum and apply, as is already stated in the policy, what the restrictions are. So I see no reason to continue it. I'd like to propose, if you want me to give you language to do that, I'll do that, and that's sure of the procedure on that. But I'd like to propose restoring the complete broadcast of the entire meeting, the public meeting.
So there's a motion for Mr. Bonagorio to reestablish rebroadcast of Residents Forum. Is that basically the gist of your motion? Mr. Bonagorio, is that the gist of your motion?
I'm sorry?
Basically, your motion is to resume broadcasting Residents Forum. Is that
Yes.
the gist of your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Ms. Farah. Any comments, discussions on this? I mean, I think we've beaten this to death and then some. So with that, we'll do a roll call vote. We'll start with you, Mr. Bonagorio.
Yes.
Dr. Trawick?
No, without restrictions.
No.
Mr. Swick, no. Vice President Moore?
No.
Mrs. Farah?
Yes.
Mr. Maloney?
No.
Ms. Farmer?
No.
Mr. McCabe's a no. Motion fails. Anything else on this? So we'll continue to
Thank
do
you.
what we were doing for the time period. And with that, Mr. Maloney, as always,
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
moved by Mr. Maloney. Can I get a second? Moved by Dr. Trawick. Is the second? All those in favor? That passes 8-0. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.